Hello and welcome to Cotton Incorporated's first podcast. My name is John Devine, economist with Cotton Incorporated. The purpose of this new series of podcasts is to supplement our regular publications and provide another way to access information on the cotton market. Each podcast will feature a different topic relevant to current events. This podcast provides an overview of early estimates for supply and demand for the upcoming 2011-2012 crop year. Given the recent run-up in prices, it is expected that cotton acreage and cotton harvest will increase next year. The question is, how large will the increase in production be, and whether the increase in production will be sufficiently large relative to any increases in cotton consumption to bring about some relief in cotton prices. Early estimates are described for 2011-2012 in the remainder of this podcast and give us a way to talk about price expectations for the upcoming crop year. Of course, the reason why we're interested in prices for next crop year is because of the extreme movement we've seen in cotton prices during the current crop year. Cotton prices around the world have set a series of all-time record highs over the past several months and continue to hold to some of the highest values ever recorded. Prices in the New York futures market crossed $2 for the first time ever in the middle of February. Index prices for physically delivered cotton have moved alongside those in the futures market and reached levels over $2.25. Volatility remains a dominant feature of price movement, making business decisions difficult throughout the entire cotton supply chain. A reason why cotton prices are so high and so volatile is that supplies have gotten tight relative to demand. If we look at world production, or the amount of cotton harvested compared to world consumption, or the amount of cotton spun into yarn, there was a shortfall in production relative to consumption for each crop year since 2005-2006. In 2009-2010, the shortfall was the widest, with nearly 15% of all the cotton consumed by mills that year not coming from that crop year's harvest, and instead coming from stocks. Both supply and demand related pressures contributed to the production-consumption gap we've seen over the past several years. From the demand side, there's been strong economic growth in emerging markets. With there being more consumers with more money across the world, there's been a significant increase in mill demand over the past decade. From the supply side, cotton production declined over the past couple of years due to the fact that cotton prices were low relative to other crops. Given that farmers, like everyone else, try to earn the most money they can for their labor, they will try to plant the crop that they think will give them the best return. Two crops that commonly can be grown on the same land as cotton are corn and soybeans. On this slide, we can look at movement in corn and soybean prices relative to movement in cotton prices. If we focus on the time period when many of the world's northern hemisphere farmers tend to make their planting decisions, which is between February and April, we see that any increases in cotton prices were outpaced by increases in corn and soybean prices for 3 out of the past 4 seasons. Only last spring did cotton prices begin to catch up with these other prices. With cotton more attractive than it had been in several years, world cotton acreage increased 10% for the current 2010-2011 crop year. Even with this increase, cotton production fell short of consumption in 2010-2011, and supplies remain extremely tight during this crop year. Given the extreme tightness of supply and also the very high levels of price, there is considerable interest about cotton acreage for the upcoming 2011-2012 crop year. Considering cotton prices set new all-time highs this year, it could be expected that cotton acreage will increase again for the 2011-2012 season. The question, once again, is how large is this increase going to be, and will any increase in production be sufficient to bring cotton prices sharply lower? In February, we typically receive the first supply and demand estimates for an upcoming crop year. Since February estimates are early, relative to a crop year that begins in August, it may be helpful to look at estimates from several different sources in order to get an idea about what different forecasters are expecting. On this slide, we can look at production figures from the USDA, the International Cotton Advisory Committee, or ICAC, and Cotlook, publishers of the A-Index. What you will notice is that the estimates from these sources vary somewhat, but do tend to be close to one another. For the current 2010-2011 crop year, production estimates from each of the estimating organizations are very similar. The early consensus for 2011-2012 is that there will be a strong increase in production next crop year. The USDA is forecasting an increase in production of about 11%, or 12 million bales. The International Cotton Advisory Committee is forecasting an increase of about 9%, or roughly 11 million bales. Kotlik forecasts an increase in production of about 13%, or nearly 15 million bales. On average, these early forecasts suggest an increase in production of just over 10% for next crop year. If such an increase is realized, it would result in the largest cotton harvest ever recorded. Here we can just put some of these numbers in context. Taking a look at the previous all-time high from USDA data, the largest harvest on record was around 122 million bales. So we can see that with expectations of 127.5 million bales for 2011-2012, that expectations are that next year's harvest will be about 6 million bales larger than any harvest that the world has ever seen. For prices, the question remains how large this increase in production might be relative to any increases in consumption. Given the world economy continues to recover from recession, there are expectations that cotton consumption will increase in 2011-2012. High prices, however, could be expected to prevent cotton consumption from rising as far as it would otherwise. The USDA, ICAC, and Kotlik all expect the increase in consumption to be about 3% next year. This 3% increase in world cotton consumption will result in a cotton consumption level for 2011-2012 that's about 4 million bales below the all-time record. Given forecasts for a strong 10% increase in cotton production and a mild 3% increase in consumption, it is expected that the world cotton harvest will exceed world mill demand in 2011-2012. This would imply the first addition of stocks in 6 years. The three different forecasting organizations expect the increase in stocks to range between 5.7 and 9.3 million bales. Any addition to stocks should help alleviate some of the severe supply conditions currently facing the market. To take a look at how the increase in stocks may affect prices, we can use the stocks-to-use ratio. The stocks-to-use ratio is one of the best tools we have for looking at movement in prices, and is defined as the ratio between ending stocks and consumption. It can be thought as being somewhat analogous to an inventory to sales ratio. Expectations are that the stocks-to-use ratio will increase between 4.5 and 8 percentage points next crop year. Even with such additions, the stocks-to-use ratio will remain just above 40%, significantly lower than averages prior to 2009-2010. This suggests prices should remain elevated next year relative to pre-2010-2011 levels. Any addition to stocks, however, could be expected to potentially provide some relief in terms of reduced volatility. When looking at all these figures, it is important to keep in mind that these are early estimates. Over time, it could be expected these estimates will change. One factor that can alter production expectations is the weather. Volatility in the weather affected a range of crops over the past several years and can rapidly change supply expectations. Last year, wet conditions in China and Pakistan impacted harvests from those countries. Dry conditions can impact harvests in 2011-2012. There are already dry conditions in both China and the U.S. If world yields end up being lower than average, next year's addition of stocks could prove to be lower than currently forecast. If the addition of stocks next year proves to be lower than currently expected, the benefits to prices from any additional supplies would be smaller. This concludes our first podcast. I'd welcome any questions you might have regarding any of the content in this presentation, or also any questions you may have about the cotton market generally. My email address is jdevine@cottoninc.com. Also, I would like to invite you to visit our website, cottonlifestylemonitor.com. There you can find a range of information related to the cotton market, as well as some information regarding consumers. Thank you for your attention, and welcome any feedback you may have.